Welcome to the Thinklings podcast, a conversation where good thoughts help renew the mind with the Word of God. I'm Charlie Carter, and I'm here with Tim Little and Andy Stearns. Let's jump into the conversation.
Welcome to the Thinklings podcast, Summer in Left Field. This is episode 93. And just going to throw it out here to you guys for an opener. What have you been reading recently? We're halfway through the summer when we're recording this. And so, what have you been reading?
I've been reading Redwall. I've been reading Strange New World. And there's another one.
Have you?
I
Have
can't
you
remember.
finished Redwall?
No, I'm 2/3 of the way through. I have thoughts. And I have a listener who has messaged me about some thoughts because they've read it too. So I'm really excited to talk about this fall. Have you read it?
Just wait for the next segment of our podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited. I want to listen to it. I have a Scribd subscription for 2 months. They don't have the first book.
You're kidding.
No, they have all these other ones. And they have this interview with Brian Jakes, which I should say this because I said Jacques or Jacques or something.
Jacques.
And I was corrected helpfully. Thank you. It's Brian Jakes. But the way it's spelled, I had a friend spelled his name that way. He's French, or his history is, lineage. And he said Jacques. And then I've also heard people say Jacques. So it's Brian Jakes, but that's all that has an interview with him. So that's what I've been I have thoughts, but I don't know if I should share them yet.
On that note, so we will have the segment that follows this opener, commonly and affectionately referred to by that common phrase.
Oh, seriously?
And I'm going to talk about that book. So I'm
Okay.
not going to say I've been reading that. I will say that the travel of the
I can't wait to talk
summer
about that.
has more or less killed my reading. It's been very hard to do reading that's not class reading.
Have you been listening?
So I'm going to get into that when we talk about Redwall.
Okay.
But so there's a bunch of books that I had to read for some doctoral classes about preaching, and it's sad that the only thing that jumps to my mind, and I won't name the name of the book because I think this guy would broadly be within our circles of schools, but it's a Wolfenstock book that I purchased,
Wolfenstock.
and I got it. It's falling apart. Like every 5 pages, a leaflet just pulls out.
Well, you just need to get a new copy. The glue didn't stick or something.
Yeah, and that is incredibly frustrating when you're trying to read through a book. And that's sad that that's the only thing I remember about
That was a
books I read.
production error. They should just replace it for you.
Yeah, I bought it on Amazon, and I didn't notice it for a while, so I don't think I have any.
That's why you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, friend.
The other book with
I will say I did go to the Faith bookstore first and asked, hey, here's the list. What do you have? And whatever you didn't have, I had to order them and read them, blitz them quickly for this doctoral stuff.
Sure. Sorry.
The only other book worth noting is with my Scribd subscription, I started listening to The Gospel According to Jesus by John MacArthur because it's been such a controversial book. I remember reading this back in seminary when I wrote a paper, Is Repentance Required for Salvation? And I remember getting really uncomfortable at times. I'm having a different experience reading it this time. I've not found hardly anything that's controversial, but I know that
We should talk about that
Yeah.
on an episode sometime.
yeah, I have my initial thought is I think there's a change in my walk with God that's affected that. And then secondly, I know that in the lordship debate, the Zane Hodges side shoots really hard at the other side and the other side, and so sometimes they throw things past each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not saying MacArthur's wrong. I know there's some issues, but also I'm listening to it while I mow the lawn. And I'm telling you, that is one of my favorite things. I really pick up more than I think, but I know I'm not analyzing it. So that's what I'm listening to.
So in your mind, Andy, what makes a good lawn mowing book?
So I think, first of all, a story. Stories are much better. But this one, I was surprised. It's been usually so I listened to Christopher Hitchens' book, Hitch 22, his memoir. And then I listened to his book, God is Not Great. And I follow both of those. But there's other books where honestly, Lord of the Rings, it was really hard because it's so slow paced to know what was going on. It's a 19-hour, for the Fellowship of the Rings is a 19-hour book.
Oh yeah, it's
So I think
lengthy.
shorter, low level stuff. That's what I'd say. So.
Yeah, and well, I'll get into this in a little bit. So Tim.
Yeah, what are you reading, Tim?
So I'm listening to Hadassah. It's
Oh.
It's about Esther. It's a popular fiction retelling of Esther. It's horrendous. I've been listening to Moby Dick with my kids. It's the unabridged edition, and it's been horrendous. So those are two. I've been working through City of God with a group. I was reading Borden of Yale. So junior boys camp, I read a book to them at night, help settle them down, and I chose Borden of Yale to read to them. So
that's a brilliant idea.
What is that?
It's
Borden of Yale.
William Borden. No reserves, no regrets, no retreats. No, I got the order wrong.
Yep.
But he was a wealthy man, and he went to Egypt and died very young.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then books I've read, Till We Have Faces. I finally read through that on a vacation.
Andy, have you read that?
No, and both the Choys have like skewered me and Fritz for not having read it yet and being a C.S. Lewis
I did
guy.
talk to Fritz about that.
I didn't really care for it.
Or he mentioned at one of the weddings that he had read that, and I would put it so. We were talking about this yesterday in my office.
I think we were, yeah.
So,
and I think I said I didn't
Stories Are
like
Soul
it then.
Food is another podcast.
Yeah.
Indy Wilson, which is Doug Wilson's son, is one of the main guys on there.
And that's N letter and then D, not Indy like Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
But it sounded like
be
Indy,
really cool.
Indy Wilson.
Nda Wilson. Let's do that. Phonetic. Nda Wilson. They have an episode where they talk about, and they might even have two actually now, where they talk about Till We Have Faces. And his take I found very helpful in understanding it. He thinks that this idea was kind of, I don't want to use the phrase, but I'm going to use it, like the magnum opus of Lewis's thinking. Like he really wanted this picture allegory of Till We Have Faces to be profound. Mm-hmm. And so he says that it kind of gets away from him the longer you read.
Oh, interesting.
So like the writing isn't cohesive. As the farther you go, the more stretch Lewis employed to make his points, trying to make it more than it was.
Okay.
And so my read through, because of our Philistine friend, I try to just pick the story. I'm not trying to read for allegory.
I still love that he calls you guys Philistines, and now forever George from Georgia in your mind is the Philistine. It's so wonderful.
It's in quotes in my mind. Air quotes. The Philistine.
George, we love you.
I
do.
I haven't met you, but having not seen you, I love you. That's kind of sacrilegious because that's a reference to Christ. I don't love you the same way I love Christ, George.
Yeah, that's a good point.
In comparison, I hate you to my love for Christ. But brotherly Christian.
Okay, get back to it. Sorry, that was a weird sighting over there.
The point being, when I read it the first time, which I've only read it once, I just read it for what is happening in the story. Characters, what are happening to the characters, how are they developing? What's the conflict? I intentionally tried to block the thoughts of my mind of like, what is Lewis trying to do?
Okay.
And I think that's helpful when you read the Ransom/Space/Heaven trilogy. When you read Narnia is kind of right in your face, but when you read Lord of the Rings, especially Lord of the Rings, because it's not meant to be uniquely symbolic.
We should talk about Till We Have Faces another time.
Yeah, but I think read it for the story, but I think it's just like the Ransom trilogy, Space trilogy, where you need a couple of repetitions to really grab what's going.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got the patience for another one. And
then, like reading Abolition of Man with That Hideous Strength is so helpful to see the picture and then the essay. I think reading The Four Loves and really understanding that alongside of Till We Have Faces is going to bring some themes, but I think it takes the repetition of the ideas.
Okay.
Just, man, Lewis was so good. Like,
I know
how you could write Till We Have Faces and you could write That Hideous Strength, but you also wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
Like you could operate on those different planes is impressive to me.
Yeah, I didn't see the connection between Till We Have Faces and Four Loves the way that I was expecting because of what other people said. But whatever, we can maybe talk about it sometime. Maybe I need to read it again, but I doubt that'll happen. Okay, two other books that I've been reading, a couple of Moody Press titles concerning relationships. Dr. Julie Slattery, because I'm working on my book, Song of Songs for Singles. These are relationship books. God, Sex, and Your Marriage is the book that she's written. And then Dean Insera, Pure, Why the Bible's Plan for Sexuality Isn't Outdated, Irrelevant, or Oppressive. So that one I haven't read as much of. But those are just a couple more books that I've been working through. You'll probably hear about some of these books in the fall season, as we'll probably bring them up some more. All right, some business we need to take care of here.
Books and business.
Let's talk about some books.
Awesome. So if you didn't already catch it, the mouse is out of the bag on Charlie's book.
Oh.
So credit where credit is due. Taylor Muggy up at Hidden Acres.
Oh, yeah.
He is the one. We connected last summer over our mutual love of Wingfeather, and obviously Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. But he recommended Redwall to me.
Okay.
And so let me give you a little precursor and background to Redwall by Brian Jacks.
I've got a question. How did the two of you end up reading the same book?
Andy and I?
Were you guys talking about it, or did it come up on a podcast? Or that's really random.
Seth Mungans recommended it to me like 5 years ago.
Okay.
And said when your kid's older, you'd like it. And then you, I think over the Christmas episode this year, said, "Oh, I'm going to read," or maybe it was like summer last year.
I started it a long time ago.
Yes, and mentioned it on the podcast.
Back to it, and then
okay,
that gets me to another topic, which we'll roll up the ball yarn at some point.
So then I bought it after remembering it from him.
My question's answered. You can keep going.
So you guys know, these two in front of me and listener, how my thoughts on audiobook versus actual reading. And so whenever possible, I don't like Audible, or I don't like the audiobook only approach. That being said, I think where it shines is I think there's an art form of reading books, where like voice actors and and strong narratives. And so I started reading Redwall. I took Redwall to Grandview Camp with me, which I was at over 4th of July, which, by the way, they know how to party for America in Eager, Arizona, let me tell you. I had an experience there, and shout out to Isaac and Peter and Thomas and Ryan.
Redwall.
My online student Camp to Us guys out there at Grandview. I walked into a Mexican restaurant wearing like a tie-dye American flag shirt.
He's still
holding
going.
an American flag, and I walked up and said, "I would like some horchata and a steak burrito, please," in a Mexican restaurant. I never felt more American in my life.
Wow.
Than that moment. I felt and that was a great burrito.
Wow.
Alberto's in Eager, Arizona. It's apparently a Mexican chain out there. I had never heard of it. But anyway,
Redwall.
So I took Redwall with me in my free time out there. I was reading it. The story captured me, as stories often do. And I had a 18-hour car ride. And you see where this is going? I broke down and got the audiobook so I could finish it, because you can't read while you drive.
Yep.
Two things you should never do. You shouldn't drink and drive. You shouldn't read and drive either. Okay.
You can. It's not advisable.
It is not.
Actually, I know a friend who. Never mind. And just keep going.
Yeah, I know somebody who did.
Find a driver. They drive. You read.
There you go.
That's better and safer.
So
we are not condoning reading while you drive.
So
thank you for the public service announcement.
We need to have an advertisement in the middle of the podcast that's like a formal, like, "Hey, stop reading and driving. It hurts people.
Listen to our podcast instead."
Yeah. Wait, we're gonna make that. I'm gonna talk to Joey about making that. He's gonna help me make a great commercial. Anyway, so I started reading, got maybe like a third to a half of the way through, and then had to purge and blitz through it to finish it. And so what is Redwall about? Redwall is a mouse monastery, and they are a peaceful group of mice. And what they do is they heal and they help and they bring peace. In the midst of this, there's this young, kind of dumb, but very heroic mouse, Matthias. And what you learn right away in the book is that there's this rat army led by Clooney the Scourge.
Clooney the Scourge.
Who's a build rat. Another way of saying he's like a pirate. He's like a pirate rat. And he's coming, and all he does is destroy, and he's coming to Redwall, which is like their living place, and he's going to try and conquer it and take it over. And it's just, boil it down to one sentence: the mouse kills the rat. But it's this ascension story of Matthias coming and becoming this warrior, and there's like this. There's a lot of great characterization. There's a lot of great virtue that's exalted, and I think it's a good children's book.
So that's one of the questions that I had is my children wondering about another series. This sounds like it could be a winner.
I think it is, and
I'm showing
there's like
maybe
20 books.
I saw there's 22.
Maybe.
So you're not sure if it's a good children's book.
I know this will be fun.
I
plan on doing this later, but let's just do that now.
I liked the story. I liked what they did with the characters, and I think there's something good in the heart of the Christian.
So
go back to Dr. Boyd's discussion of the Odyssey, and it's like this push of like, when is the king gonna come home?
Yeah.
And there's that theme in this story, and I don't want to spoil anything, but
don't.
But there is a scene of victorious glory of like the victory.
Okay.
That is, and I think it exalts. Ooh, you have it here.
So
that being said,
so I'm halfway.
I don't know if it's like excellently written, and I'm sure we're gonna hear that there are some times where I don't know. I'm interested to see what you say. I think overall, it exalts bravery and courage and valor. So go ahead.
Well, I'm only halfway through, so that's the thing is I can't really give it too much of an intro. So about a quarter of the way in, I had one thought, and then during the second quarter, I've started to get, as you said, captured by it. Mm-hmm. So I've got to finish it before I give it a full thing. But what I would say is, so far, and you've made it all the way through, you remember at the same time I'm listening to S.D. Smith's Tales of Natalia, and then my kids just read Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe. So, and I've read a little bit of Tolkien recently. And so to me, at the beginning, I would have said it felt kind of thin compared to those. Yes. Would you say the same thing?
Like,
not bad. Well, just not the same depth.
But see, that's where I think for a child, I had to put it in the context of like, if I was 8 or 9 or 10 years old.
Yes.
And I didn't have the foreshadowing abilities to know what's going to happen. Because I'll just, exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know the ending of the book.
Yep.
You just, you haven't read it yet, but you know exactly what's going to happen. Yep. And I don't want to say it, but we already know. Yeah. It's classic, like, evil rat. Heroic mouse.
Yeah. Rat's really big. Wall. Mouse is really small.
Yep. And so what's going to happen?
But Chronicles of Prydain or Redwall?
Can I say one more thing about this?
Chronicles of Prydain.
Okay.
So I bought both of those with some money I got for Christmas, like gift cards.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say about this book is there's a couple of curse words that I wasn't expecting, which I'm not saying you can't read a book because of that, but if I were handing this off...
I would want to know.
Yeah, if I was handing this off to Evan, I would be like,
don't know if I caught those.
I marked them. And then the other thing was cornflower.
Oh,
and I thought this might be awakening something that I don't want awoken yet. But overall, I thought this is literally just medieval knights and damsels. It took me sorry about that, listener. It took me a while to figure that out, which is not bad.
Yeah.
But I do think there's virtue. I think Clooney is a good foil for like evil and all his henchmen, like the whole, like the squabbles.
So
I'm with you. It's good.
I will say with the cornflower is a female mouse and it's pretty blunt from our perspective as adults. Like, you can see what's going on there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure a child would necessarily pick up on it.
Yes, I had that same thought.
And the way that it's resolved,
which I don't know yet.
which I don't want to give it away.
Don't give it away.
Okay, we'll stop there.
But just say it aligns more with Tim's views than with our modern culture's views.
Okay. So, and again, once I get through it, I'll have a take.
I've
enjoyed it. And I thought I've been very creative.
What it reminds me of is like the light, fun characterization of animals.
Yep.
And the humor. It kind of feels like a wing feathery Chronicles of Narnia feel to it. But I will say, even this is where I think you're borrowing from a story that's been told over and over and over again. We know it's good. Like, the virtue is objective and a hero is a hero.
Yep.
And you love a hero. And at the end of the story, there is a scene that happens. And you just get chills.
Okay. See,
you're like, oh, yeah. And I don't know if that was just me. I mean, I was on a long car ride and I literally listened to like 5 straight hours. But you get to that point and you're like, boom, boom. And it's like the way that it's developed is there's like a famous hero that founded this Redwall Abbey, which is Martin the Warrior. And you find out of this like connection between Martin and Matthias, you know, how they're connected in a way. And it's like he becomes this great hero. And it kind of has a, I don't like to use this word, but it has an element of like this prophetic, like the
No, it
hero
does.
is the
It does.
hero is meant to, like, he's
Yeah.
prophesied of.
Yep.
And the way that they discover that is ancient writings that they didn't know existed, and you know they eventually find the thing. Anyway, it's I think a good hero conquers bad guy story for a child.
It also had a Ignatius of Loyola Catholic monk warrior monastery thing, which was intriguing from a Western Civ standpoint.
So what I think is not as good about this Animal Kid story that other books have done much better with is the naming.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite names of any animal in any story is Truffle Hunter. And what kind of animal? Is that a badger? Or it's not a badger.
I think so.
There's a badger in this book just called Constance.
Yeah, Constance.
And she's a great character.
But I think through Catholic history, like there's a lot of Catholicism that I think is behind this. I'm not saying it's a Catholic book, but there are elements where I think if I knew a lot about, which I do, I know a lot about Catholicism, I'm hearing the echoes of medieval Catholic history and theology and, you know.
Yeah. And so
and I mean, if I correct me, anyways, I'm excited to finish it because I was just getting pulled in.
I think you will enjoy the ending. You will enjoy the ending. I think the way that they resolve the cornflower romance.
Oh man, I can't wait to
is
read that.
Direct and appropriate.
Oh, good. All right.
Because they kind of hint at one point that maybe Clooney's gonna get involved with that.
You know,
Dude,
most people
don't
are
give
just
anything
gonna
away.
be, if they haven't read the book, are just gonna be like, whatever. I know you guys are
I
having a
think
great
it's
time.
I think it's kind of just honestly, I think it was a way for Jake's to set up future stories.
Yeah.
Because I think it's book 4 is named pertinently to something that will happen.
Yep.
I won't give it away, but you know,
I will say this though, it was a fun. From what I read, I'm like, this is a fun story.
it's not at the same level as some of those others.
Yeah, it's good, really
but
good.
I do think that there's
Good things about
overall good.
Yeah,
If I
I
had
would
to
agree.
give a rating, I'm just gonna plump it right on the middle, like 5
Yes.
and 7/8.
Yeah. I'm only halfway, but I would go right there. It's good.
I saw Andy's book, and its aesthetics are.
Well, I have the mass market paperback I got on
I can
thrift
see.
books for like $2.
Okay.
So like,
Who's gonna open the real book? The book of
that's me.
books?
Andy is.
yeah, real book. So for this week, with me this year, this summer, we've been walking through Colossians chapter 3. Last time we were together, we were talking about death. And I just want to give a shout out to one listener in particular who gets a little squeamish when blood and guts and whatnot has been talked about, and was listening to this on the way to church while they were driving. Thankfully, they did not pass out while driving. But this episode, listener, you can be assured there will be no death, no dismemberment, no cutting off of appendages being discussed. So,
You are horrendous.
all right, that's all I'm going to say about that one.
You talking to me? Okay, you're talking to him. I was like, I didn't even say anything yet.
I know. I just had to look this way to look and speak into the mic.
Yeah, I did think it was interesting on that previous episode, the discussion we had about
I know.
hunting and
It was so
dispatching
good.
animals. And
Moving on.
So this week so in Colossians chapter 3, the first 4 verses talk about your mind and your internal person and what you're aimed at and what you're pursuing, to seek the things above and set your mind on things above. In verses 5 all the way down to 11 of Colossians chapter 3, it talks about what you need to stop or cease or quit in your life. And he uses 2 verbs. He uses put to death, and we talked about the grizzly and do what is necessary nature to that verb, and then put away. And that was the idea of entirety. In verse 10, he says, seeing that you have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. And the put on right there is the same verb that's in verse 12, where he then gives you the direct command to put on as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved. And he lists a bunch of virtues for you to put on. So today, just want to talk about the virtues that you put on. So there is this pattern in Christianity where when you get saved, something takes place. Historically, you have put off your old person. That's not who you are anymore. You have the nature of it, but that's not you as a sum total. And you've put on a new person, a new spiritual person. You have a new nature, one that has the ability to say yes to God and to follow God and to obey the Spirit. And what happened is your mind was initially renewed. But then as you live your life, you continue to live out that internal change. You continue to put off the old ways. You continue to put on the new ways. And you do that by renewing your mind, your internal person. You could say your mind, your heart, yourself. I think all those things would fit. So he's now at the third major emphasis in this passage, which is to put on these virtues that are in line with the new person. So I'm just going to read the section first before we get started. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved. Now here's what you put on: compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if anyone has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Verse 14, and above all these, and now it's the same verbal command, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Interestingly enough, the last three verses we've already covered when we did our very first Thanksgivings episode. So that means in this podcast, we've actually, after this episode, covered all of these 17 verses. So let's go ahead and finish this out. So the verb put on then, it's not like you notice something massive when you study the Greek. It literally just means to put it on. So we know what that means. Today, we would use this in reference to clothing. I'm going to go put on my jacket, or I'm going to put on my coat, or I put on my clothes, or I change my clothes and I put these on. It's the same idea. And actually, in their era, they would have used this verb for putting on clothes. So I think there's a little bit of a mental image that Paul's using here. Put on then, as God's chosen ones. In fact, this image is so strong in the history that if you read the NIV translation, it doesn't say put on, it says clothe yourselves with. So I think that's an important metaphor for us to stop, make some observations about, and meditate on. All right. This is going to be interesting. How do you know, what do you think the significance is of Paul saying clothe yourselves? Why doesn't he just say live these virtues in your day-to-day life? What do you learn more by him using the metaphor of put on or clothe yourself? What's the new information with that metaphor?
Boy, it's just like encapsulates your being and who you are.
Oh, that's
or
good.
Is it visual and that it's seeable to everybody? Or I'm not really sure. I'm trying to think through the metaphor and what the points of correspondence would be.
I think both those are valid.
Can you re-ask the question for me?
Yeah. So he doesn't say in verse 12, live a life of compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, patience. And then most of all, live a life of love. He doesn't say behave compassionately or kindly or humbly. He says instead, clothe yourselves with. So why does he use the metaphor of putting on clothes? What do you learn from that metaphor more than him just saying, live these things out? Because that's how a metaphor works. There's something beyond just the bare communication of a straight up fact.
Well, I think it's a good metaphor of a daily process that goes in concert with the previous metaphor. Mm-hmm. So daily, there's needs to be, you don't put on, I don't know how to say this. So just thinking about the idea of putting on clothing. You put it on every day. When something gets dirty, you take it off, you wash it, you put it on. Mm-hmm. So there's a habitual, regular process of the cleansing of the bad and putting on what is clean.
Yeah.
So I think that was where my mind went, was this is a daily process.
Yes. So between you two, you hit 3 different points of comparison. Number 1, clothing is a daily, consistent, habitual thing. So like you know someone by the type of clothing they wear. You can tell a lot about. I know it's not everything, but people have like looks, and it sort of embodies them.
Mhm.
Number two, you said, Tim, that it covers all of you. It like encapsulates you. You're
Mhm.
kind of wrapped up in it. I especially think of like a robe that you put
Mhm.
on. And then the third thing you said is it's visual.
Mhm.
And so I think for me, I like the visual angle the best. All of those are connected, but that's what I think about. So consider this. When Paul says, clothe yourselves with, let's say, humility, I think the idea here would be there's things I need to do to become humble, but how would I know when I've been clothed with humility? I don't think it's just that I think I'm humble. I think it's that I'm humble enough to a degree that other people see it.
Sure.
Just like my clothing, like I don't have to like what am I wearing right now?
A Star Wars t-shirt.
Yeah.
Got a TIE fighter on the front.
Yep. All four colors of the different groups, the gold group, blue group, whatever, gold leader, red leader, whatever. Now, here's my point though. I didn't have to tell you that. I have to walk in and be like, hey guys, I just want you to know I'm wearing a Star Wars shirt today. You knew it. Why? Because I walked in wearing it. And so I think there's a little bit of that here. You, Christian, be clothed with love to the point where, like you were saying, Tim, it fully encapsulates your being. Like it's a totality. It's like, how do I characterize you? By love, by humility. I think it's something that's visible externally. If you've ever met someone who's super humble or super gentle and you're like, man, is that person a believer? And what they are later, you find out, not always, but I think there's something to where it's so a part of your characteristics that other people see it. Go for it.
So it's interesting that you say that. Colossians is Pauline,
Mhm.
and he
the
does
twin
make
epistle.
this statement in another. That's this illustration in other places. But my thought is, if someone's wearing dirty clothes
Mhm.
physically, how might we discern that? And it might not only be visibility.
Mhm.
We might also smell
Yeah.
something.
Yep.
And it's interesting that both the aroma of someone and the look of
Mhm.
someone is
Mhm.
compared in 2 Corinthians
Yep.
of the aroma or the light of Christ. And that, I think the clothing here is another way of illustrating that same point.
Yeah.
And where my mind went as you were talking about that is, where do I clothe myself? I usually don't do that in front of other people. And if I don't do that at home by myself, if I just neglected to put on clothes and walked to work or school, everyone else would perceive that I had
Yes.
not dressed.
Yes.
And so
You're
that
still in your
spiritual metaphor
pajamas.
is so powerful if you are clothed incorrectly
Yes.
and you go around other people,
Mhm.
they will pick up on
Yes.
the spiritual clothing that you have. And it clothes,
Mhm.
a smell,
Yep.
the light, all those illustrations. I think what's cool about that is then like, so where am I doing it? Like, it's not something like before other people. Like that's a very private, personal walk where I'm putting off, putting away,
Mhm.
cleansing, and putting on. Gives me almost an appeal in the metaphor to the quiet, devotional nature
Yeah.
of daily Christian life.
And I would say it's hard for me. So just thinking Bible study practice and hermeneutics, how far do I press the metaphor? What exactly
Yeah, that's
is he
what I was
intending?
thinking.
And so when I weigh all these things out, I think personally, and I could be wrong, I think the big idea,
Yeah.
which hits with your smell thing, is that it's discernible and noticeable to other people.
Yep.
Now, I don't think that means if someone hasn't walked up to you this week and said, hey, you're humble, that you're failing at this. But I do think that brings up another thought. You probably have close friends, and you might think, hey, I'm pretty humble. I'm kind. I'm not aggressive. I'm not harsh. I'm, gentle or whatever. But often, the best way for us to know how we are doing is to find a wise, godly fellow believer and say, hey, what do you see? Like, what kind of clothes do you think I'm spiritually wearing? And I do think, listener, if you don't have someone in your life, you can ask those kinds of questions. If you don't have people you can be in front of who are believers, who will look at your clothing, spiritually clothing, okay, and say, hey, I think this, but I do notice this. Or sometimes we just think, I remember thinking like, I don't have a problem with pride. I'm not a very prideful person. And then I hit a number of circumstances where God exposed my pride, and it took a faithful fellow believer to say, that is something that I've noticed in this area in your life. And so I think there's two sides. There's two ways I think to look through this part of the passages. Number one, ask the question, if you talk to someone else, would they think you're compassionate? Would they think you're kind? Would they call you somewhat humble? Would they think of you as a meek or a patient person? Are you known for bearing with others? And that's challenging because they can be frustrating to deal with other people. But are you known for that, or are you kind of a short person? And then it says, if someone has a complaint against another, you need to forgive. Do you forgive when people complain? I don't know if that even means sin. Like maybe a complaint is just something they don't prefer. I don't know. And then it says, above all these, put on love. Would another person say you are characterized by love? So I think that's one way to look at this passage. So listener, I think you need to take an inventory. Have you put on? And then there's another way to look at it, which has to do with the different virtues. But I think you've got something you want to say. Go for it.
Well, I think too, the people you're around, I think it would not only be their perception of who you are, but look at what you produce in their life. So like when you are in a position of influence around other people, which friends influence each other all the time, is the product of spending time with you that they are more loving, that they are more peaceful or joyful, and or do you leave? I found this, it's so easy with close friends to get together and complain. And so it's like you leave, you get out of the car and it's like, okay, see you later. And you're both like, worse off than when you started.
Yep.
And convince me that that's the Holy Spirit. You can't. And I think that is it's a clothing issue.
It is. It is.
So like not only what they would perceive of you, but look at how you are influencing other people spiritually, and you will pick up on spirit versus flesh realms of influence in other people's lives.
That's actually been, as a parent, when I see my kids doing things, it's been interesting lately for me to think, oh, am I doing that in front of them? Is that where they're picking that up? It's not always the case, but it is a good question to ask. Did you have something you want to say, Tim?
Just how this fits within the context of the previous section, verses 1 through 7. But maybe we are kind of going long. Maybe the listener just needs to listen to those previous episodes, and then they can take that into account.
Yeah. The last thing I would say is, so I think of it from the external visibility, not visual only, but like, do other people see this and say, because it's not like I think I'm loving. I think it's that, am I to the point where other people would say that too, for whatever reason. But then secondly, I think there's value here in Paul laying out a list of virtues. I'm not saying you just look at the virtues and try to emulate them, but he does command you to put them on. So let's just take kindness. How do you put kindness on? Well, there could be a number of ways to approach that, but the first thing I think would be to biblically meditate on kindness. What is kindness? What does kindness look like? What if you have a wrong definition of kindness? Today, there's a lot of words that have been redefined in our culture. And so kind might to you in your culture be thinking, well, I have to only agree with someone else. Is that biblically what kindness is? Humility, does that mean I never share my opinion or I never have an opinion? No, but I think maybe the way. So this is a good opportunity for you to get a nice simple Bible tool like a topical Bible or a study Bible or even just a minimal commentary, and do a quick study. Like look up the word humility in the New Testament, read every verse, and then what are you learning about? All right, go ahead.
So I'm going to reveal something really dumb that I did today, but I think it's helpful for this.
Okay.
So right before we started recording this morning, we kind of got here, made coffee, and we all had to use the restroom. And coming out of the restroom, I realized something about my clothing.
Oh, that's right. This is perfect.
I realized that I had put my shirt on inside out, and it's a polo. And I mean, like, that just tells you how my day's going, and I walked in and it's like, guys, did you even notice that my shirt was on inside out? And like, no,
we didn't.
And so just to use that illustration, like when I realized that, what did I do?
Change your shirt.
I took the shirt off and I put it back on the way it was supposed to be. Yep. And so, how do I put on? I think you have to recognize, ooh, that's not the shirt I should have on,
Yes.
or
Yes.
that's inside out.
Yep.
You know, like,
That's
why don't we
good.
fix that? So you can never, and because I think this is a grand metaphor for sanctification,
hmm
you can never separate the recognition of the wrong clothing
hmm
and the removal, which I would just say is like a cleansing
hmm
from the putting on. Like, it's not just a do the right thing, even though he does command that you live a certain way, but I think it's always connected to that idea of repentance.
Well, and even how does he start the section off? Seek your mind, seek the things that are above, set your mind on the things that are above. So it has to be a mindset change first. And so I think in the passage, you're like, well, how do I become more loving? I mean, go back up to the beginning, and you've got to renew your mind, and you've got to look for where you're not being loving, and you've got to be humble, and you've got to repent. At the same time, I know that okay, I'll take dirty joking as an example. So I always thought it was fine to make crude humor jokes. I thought that was no big deal. And so someone could have said stop, and I would have thought, okay, they don't like that. But it wasn't until I read in Ephesians and Colossians what it says about crude joking and dirty talking that helped me know, oh, that's inappropriate. And so then it became a question of learning to recognize when I'm doing that. Oh, I can't do that. Oh, it's kind of like thinking your shirt's clean or on the right way. And then, so I do think there's an informative benefit to this section, but you can't just stop there.
You know, I do like a good petroleum joke, but if we don't want any crude joking, I'm okay with that.
Oh, that was good. If we refined it, it would be more gas for our discussion.
That's why I was like holding back a smirk while you're talking about that. Like,
so let's go
Thank
ahead.
you for listening to the
let me pull in.
Sorry.
So listener, we're good at making jokes,
I'm a child.
or we're bad at making jokes. One of the two. But what I would say is, I think the call from Scripture this week is to look into the mirror of God's Word and see what the proper clothing for you is. And I would say that when you read a verse like this, where it says, put on these things, and it says, make meekness and patience and humility and kindness, sometimes you already know what humility is, or meekness, or patience, but by reading it in God's Word and having a humble attitude before the Lord, the Spirit works to convict you of something. And so, listener, is there a way in your life this week where you don't have the right clothes on? If there is, humble yourself, turn to the Lord, seek forgiveness, and then walk in that new life.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thinklings podcast. We would love to hear from you. If you have any feedback, suggestions, or potential topics that you'd like us to discuss, you can contact us through our email, thinklingspodcast@gmail.com. Remember, don't let this conversation end with this podcast. Read good books, talk about them with your friends, and always continue to cultivate your mind. See you next time on the Thinklings podcast.